The Death, Dying, Diagnosis and Doulas podcast has more to share. Our daily advice will help you to access information through conversations and feel empowered. Follow Doula Connections on Facebook and Instagram.
So, hello, the gorgeous Kat Barlow. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, lovely?
Excellent. Kat runs a business called Empowerment Ethos. She's all about working with kids with disabilities, their parents, and diversity. So we've got so much that we can talk about. So first up, Kat, tell me a little bit about you, about your experiences in life and how you've ended up running a business called Empowerment Ethos.
Goodness. Well, the very short version of that is I was working in film and television when my son came blazing into the world 11 weeks early. And so it certainly became clear that I wouldn't be going back to work doing a 90-hour week on a film set somewhere. And so I looked for ways to explore how to use the skills that I learned over the years to be able to help other people. And then as it came along, Noah had complex needs and that grew. And then we got a diagnosis for him of mitochondrial disease, which has no treatment and no cure. And I started to look at all the research that I've done over the years, thinking, I wonder how I could help people and help other people like me who are in this situation and circumstance and be able to support them. And I couldn't find anything else out there where somebody had been through it and was also helping at the same time. So it just became an organic growth, really, and then eventually into the business Empowerment Ethos. And I get the privilege now of walking families through their journey of their exploration into the unknown, basically.
So tell us about your gorgeous son, Noah.
He's a legend. So Noah, who gets both names, Noah Barlow, in the same way I do. So he's really into Star Wars, loves Lego. He's an incredible soul. He's written his own book. And so he is a roller. He's on wheels. He has a tube. And as he would describe it, having mitochondrial disease means that nothing works properly in your body. So all the cells in your body don't make energy properly. So his words to describe it is nothing from the top of my head to the tips of my toes works in an ordinary way. And so life over the last 7 years has been an exploration of what that looks like for him and for us as a family.
Yeah, because certainly everything that I've seen with Noah, he's an amazing kid, so you're doing an awesome job. And I'm thinking, so did you then think to yourself, well, how do I make the best experience of life for my son, and then how do I help other people? Was that the catalyst?
At the beginning, it was just trying to work out what was going on for him. For the first 2 years, we were in hospital constantly and consistently, and no one could give us any answers, and no one could tell us what was going on. And so that was kind of the endless cycle and we were living in, uncertainty. And then when he was about 2 years old, he had an MRI that looked at his bilateral symmetrical brainstem damage. And anyone who knows anything about brains knows that brainstems are not where you want damage. That's where all your automatic things happen, like your breathing and circulation, the things that you need. And so then that became that conversation we had with physicians then, which was, Noah might have 7 months, he might have 7 years, but he won't live past 10, was the beginning of that experience of grief, that living grief where there was no treatment, there is no treatments, there is no cure for that. So how do we live? Like, I remember sitting, looking at him after that conversation, just going, but he's my Noah, but he's my little one, but he's my soul. What does this look like? How is he laughing and smiling and interacting, and that be the truth all at the same time? Because that's, the paradox of those types of diagnoses is that where they are still your person, they are still your little one, but suddenly all expectation of what might have been goes flying out the window. And so, in those couple of weeks after that, of just sitting in that deep grief of not wanting to face it, not wanting to look at it, which I think is very ordinary, and then just going, okay, how can I honor the life that he has, and what's going to happen next, and still live in this beautiful way that we want to live, and still love him in an unconditional way. And so I came to describe it as the terrible gift, which is, you know, having a child like Noah has given us the opportunity to experience life in a way that a lot of people don't get to, which is to be, to live in the moment, to live in the now, to not wonder about what might be, and in fact just go, well, this is what is, let's live for today, let's do today and see what that looks like. Certainly wouldn't wish it on anybody else, and that's why we call it the terrible gift too. Right?
Yeah. So what's his experience been through all of this? Like, you know, because, you know, again, you know, a 2-year-old to where he is, what is he, 11 or 12 or something
11.
now? 11, yeah. So in all of those years, you know, if you're you know, there's all those of us out there that have got children with disabilities, with diversities, you know, that are having challenges in life. Like, how do you work with your child? How do you work with the family to be able to look at life as a gift and find the most in everything? Because I know that's what you do. So how have you done that?
I think it was listening a lot to Noah and not being afraid to sit with him in his darkness and the times where he's like, this isn't fair and this isn't okay for me, and acknowledging that was true for him that moment, and then looking to what was next. You know, it's okay not to be okay, and now what will we do, and now what will be next. And I think for so many families like ours, we spend a lot of time trying to fix that situation and trying to mend that situation and trying to find a way out of that situation, when in fact, if we just invested that time and energy in just being with our children and just having and sharing with them in what is, because they don't know any different, this is what it is, you know, and recognizing that they are everything that was ever going to be is already within them, and so acknowledging that, and instead of trying to fix them when they're absolutely not broken, they are perfect in every way, and then to walk each day. And so a lot of it was asking questions to Noah. We have a thing in our house called the Living Life List, and Noah has a website called Living Life List now, where we don't look towards death, but what we do is we look at how can we improve life today? What does that look like? And at the beginning on his list, you know, he had these big extraordinary things. You know, I want to hug a seal, I want to drive a tractor, and certainly, you know, we made those things happen for him. We were lucky that that's what we did, but there were really small things on there too. I remember one of the things he wrote was that he wanted to stand on the coffee table dressed as a Viking and be yelling on the table. And, you know, those little moments of just going, ordinarily, I'd be like, no, you can't stand on the table. Like, why would you want to do that? And like, let's try and divert that into something else. And then, you know, the terrible gift meant that I get to go, yeah, you know what, why not? Like, let's both stand on the coffee table and yell like Vikings, because I can't see a reason why not to do that. And so acknowledging what is actually their experience and acknowledging what actually is important to them, you know, and it's a roller coaster some days, like as it is for any parent of any child on earth, right? It's not, you don't get a book with the instructions in there. Yeah, I wish we did, but you've just got to go with what is. And certainly for Noah, his ability to be able to connect with people, for him to be able to explore what's happening for him and to explain what's happening for him, and to be an ambassador for the charities that he works for is extraordinary. He blows me away every time. Every time I think, how will we walk this next step? He shows me first.
Wow, that's amazing. So how old was Noah when you decided that you could help other people through your own experiences?
So I was a lot of research. So I started learning about neurology. I started doing grand rounds and reading all this information to help him first, right? So it was to look at all that information. And then after about 5 years of solid research, and Noah was the oldest tube-fed child with no safe foods and that sort of thing. And I kept being told nothing was possible. And I thought, no, hang on, it is possible. And so I started to make changes. Noah now eats food. He has 35 safe foods, which they never said would happen. And he's had surgeries, which they said he'd never walk from, and he does. And so I stopped looking at the limits that people would put on us and started to look at life beyond limits. So life beyond what everybody kept telling us was possible or probable, and instead lived his truth, whatever he presented that to be. And so he was about 7 when I started to think, you know what, I think this is something I should just share with other people. And it wasn't a business then, it was just literally, we've always shared Noah's story. and to help other people walk the same path. And so we just became an organic flow of that. Like, what does this look like? And people would ask me all the time, how do you stay so positive? And I didn't see myself that way. I see myself as optimistic, certainly not in that positive way. We're not happiness harassers around here. We live in each moment, whatever that looks like. But then I started to think, well, maybe I should open the door to teaching this to other people. My mom's a teacher. She's an extraordinary teacher, and so to be able to walk in that path is a gift, certainly.
So did you find it was because you spent so much time in hospitals and you started to observe other parents and other families and the kids, and how did you figure out what you thought they needed and then figure out what they actually did need?
It's listening, right? So having people noting what was important to me and what was important to our family was mostly people listening and just sitting in that deep listening where people listen with their heads, with their hearts, and with their body, and instead of thinking they could fix it, which was never the point, and actually not possible, right? There's nothing to fix, nothing is broken. And so we call ourselves the usual suspects, and we would just come around each other and living this life, right? We got the opportunity to meet people, hospice parents, when we were around the children's hospice here in Victoria, which we're very lucky to have here, and just meet people on these camps. And, we have the darkest sense of humor because that's how we roll. And we just came around each other. And what I started to understand that actually it was how we were dealing with what was happening for us now was much more a symptom of what we'd experienced as children or what we'd learned about resilience and grit and strength when we were children. And the ability to be able to rest and what that looks like, and knowing that we don't have to do anything. And certainly there's massive challenges now with COVID and looking after ourselves and that sort of thing. But it's listening. It is that deep listening to people, because that's what matters to us the most, having people who will sit with us in the darkness and go, yeah, this is really hard.
Yeah. So when you reflect on all of those parents that you've met over these years, are there any similarities in really what they're thinking? Or are they all just completely different and totally individual?
I think there's a massive amount of similarities, right? There's a massive amount of fear. We certainly all experience that across the board, me included. When you're told your child has a life-limiting condition, I think your first response is, this isn't what I expected, this isn't okay for me, and terror really about what's going to happen next and what would that look like. I think there just isn't the resources out there that you would expect, right? Because for me personally, I believe it starts right at the beginning of a journey when people say, as long as they're healthy, when you have a baby. And actually 1 in 5 children have a disability. So what if we started right then and you said, I hope that they're peaceful, or I hope that they're happy, or I hope that they're, they find love, or I hope that they're greatly loved. That would be a better wish for people than I hope they're healthy, because I think right from the beginning, you're often disenfranchised and without information, like somehow what you were gifted was less, which is wildly untrue. But unfortunately, that's how society rolls right now. And then, you have the extraordinary Paralympics, and it gives people the opportunity, to look at people with diversities and think it's absolutely not less. In fact, look at these incredible badasses and look what might be, for our future. And certainly, there are loads of people with disabilities who don't like sport too, right? It is a many splendid thing, just like ordinary folk. We call in this family, it's extraordinary and ordinary, and we see our disabilities in this house, myself included, as upgrades and a chance to look at life in a different way. So I think there's massive similarities and some differences, having that ability to be able to cope with what's going on, and I think it also takes time, right? In the first few weeks, in the first few months, it's extraordinarily challenging and comes with experience when you've got that opportunity to grow with your child and learn what that looks like now that things are different, and you're able to accept that.
I tell you what, I bet there's lots of us that have said, as long as they're healthy, I know
Oh,
I
me
have.
too, right?
And I won't do it again. I won't do it again. I've just learned a lesson from that. So thank you for that, Kat. You know, it's huge. So
we all learn as we go, right? And me too. But the same with absolutely everything I think that I've come across and experienced with you know, I'm not disabled, so I don't know what it's like either. All I can do is talk to my mates who are disabled and talk to Noah and tell him his experience, and you know, his journey isn't my journey, and I can't know what it's like. I can only view from an outside source, and certainly I've made massive mistakes in the past about how I've spoken about disability and how I've behaved around people who are disabled. I think all we can do is learn as we go and understand and be willing to say, oh, that one's on me and I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do something different. Now I know. Right?
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned earlier about, you know, children with cancer. So I imagine you've witnessed a lot of death, you know, in the hospice, etc., with children dying for all sorts of reasons. What's the kids' experience in all of that? What have you observed the children and how they respond to knowing that they're going to die if they're old enough, or in those last few weeks and days? Like, I'm really interested to know your perspective, of the children's perspective of that situation.
There is truly a massive gap in support for children who are palliative care, who are also witnessing their friends dying. Massive. In fact, you know, we've been to more children's funerals than we have grown-up funerals. There was a time there, you know, where there was 8 of our beautiful friends lost their babies, lost their children, and I was privileged enough that to be there for one of them, and for them to allow me into that space when they were so deeply suffering at the beginning, and to get a tiny glimpse of perhaps what grief looks like. You know, and for me to be able to sit with them, and for them to allow me into that intimate space of what that looks like. You know, sharing photographs and what that felt like and what that looked like in those final moments too. And so it is, the side of that is that we're not expecting that. It is not something that we would ordinarily think was going to happen. And even though a lot of the children had complex issues, you know, death wasn't necessarily on the cards or expected as rapidly as it came along. And so obviously there's, you know, a complete distress and overwhelm in those moments, and disbelief that could be what it is. The other side of that is walking with a palliative care child like my son, who has lost a friend, and lots of them over a small amount of time. And actually, when we look for professional support for him for his grief that's outside of me talking to him, because it's important that they talk to people outside of their own family, there was no one. So there is no support for children who are palliative care who have also lost someone. So, and I reached out to big agencies and big people, and they said it's just something we've never thought of doing.
Wow.
So there's certainly great support for siblings, and that's wonderful, and I think that's, you know, absolutely essential. But in terms of their mates, there just isn't. So we sought the help of a psychologist for Noah, and he has memory books of his friends where he's written stories about them, and he thinks about them, what they look like now and what they do, and usually they're racing each other like Mario Kart on their wheelchairs, all with different flame attachment to the back, and that's how he talks about them. And it's just opening the door to those difficult conversations, because I think as grown, we shy away from death and wanting to talk about it, especially when it's exquisitely painful to us personally. And it's just allowing yourself to sit in that with them, because it's raw, and because it's difficult, and because it's beautiful all at once.
Yeah, that is amazing, because there's no doubt that a lot of the community, and certainly children, have never experienced death. It's not something that parents tend to think about, I suppose. It's not. And a little quick story. I mean, my mum, I can remember her tell her brother died when she was 10. He died on a motorbike accident. And still to this day, she talks about the fact that not one single person asked her what happened. Not one single person said, "Are you okay?" She said it was like nothing happened. Even her parents didn't want to talk to her about it. Like it was just like a no-go zone. So I suppose
people
we've
get
come...
really, really worried that they'll hurt them or that they'll somehow remind them. But what I've known from my friends who've told me specifically about their own children, you can't re-hurt us with this information. We already know it. We're walking it, and actually it's much worse if you don't say their name.
Yeah.
And so with that information that I've been gifted from my friends, I've tried to be that with Noah and just say, you know, when he brings them up, you know, as ordinary, or, you know, and kids talk about their mates in very different ways, right? And it's not for us to prescribe what that looks like or how that feels like. And sometimes he's really, really cross and really mad and he's really angry, and other times he thinks it's funny to talk about, you know, like them as Mario Karts and driving around with flames on them and that sort of stuff. And other times he's got questions, and so it's just for me to sit and answer those and be okay with that, because we live in a different circumstance and situation where actually in our house that's a bit more ordinary than it is for other people.
Yeah, because you hear so much about people, particularly older people, you know, when they die, families will say, you know, we'll be grateful for their life and look for the good things and what do you feel grateful for? But with children, it feels harder to me. Maybe that's just my perception, but what do you think about that?
I think it feels harder. I do. I think that it's not, you know, the terrible thing about that is on the other side of that is people are like, yeah, but they were sick, or yeah, but they were this, or yes, but this. And I think that's even worse, that somehow, again, that's less, or that pain would be less, which is, you know, obviously completely untrue. I think people seek to diminish their own pain with what they state, rather than it be a real thing for them. So they'll say, you know, oh, at least they had this, or at least they did that, or at least you did this, or at least you got that. And, you know, they say things to diminish their own pain because they're not willing to sit in what it actually feels like to be, to sit in the pain with somebody else. And compassion, as we know, the most important thing is to sit with somebody in their suffering and be willing to do that, no matter how hard it is, no matter how challenging it is. And it is difficult, right? No question that makes, you know, it's challenging, but it's also, I think it's a gift to have somebody who's willing to say, I'm going to invite you into the most vulnerable time of my life and the most challenging time of my life. Will you sit with me? And to me, that's, you know, an extraordinary thing that someone would allow that. So I'm always grateful that people, you know, allow that space. And I certainly am still learning too, right? I think we all are. And
it's certainly a skill that I don't think most people have. As you say, they don't know what to say. So they come up with something like, oh, well, at least, where it doesn't really sort of, it's not deep, personal. It's more or less in a way like even pushing it aside because it's too uncomfortable for me to talk about. Yeah. So let's go elsewhere. But it's, certainly I could see that.
In you know, lots of cultures like we have, is that they death isn't something that's commonly talked about, right? It is something to be avoided. It is something to be to not see. But then, you know, you view in other situations like the Bhutanese people where, you know, they stop 5 times every day to think about their own death. And I've, you know, read about meditations about micro death practices where the ability to be able to sit in what an ending looks like, you know, because we all know people who, you know, when they get to an end of a book, they go slow, or they get to the end of a Netflix show, they don't want to deal with that. So those micro endings and how we deal with them, you know, speaks to how we're going to deal with all sorts of different endings, right? But for me, I think, you know, it is the gift of loving somebody completely and fully, is to carry the burden of their death with you and be okay with that, because that's what loving somebody unconditionally is. Yeah,
I love that. So are you open to telling everybody the little story about Noah and the camp recently? Because I love that. The recent one where the waterfall.
Yes.
I loved that story when I read it.
We love our camps. So we just went on a school camp with Noah, and before we go, we spent a lot of time saying, you know, you won't be able to do this, and just actually because you're on wheels and that's up a mountain, and that's just how it is. And so we worked out what would work and what would not work. And then on the last day, it'd been raining heavily, constantly. The puddles were so thick and deep, and the mud was ridiculous. And he just looked at me, and I was like, "You want to go on this waterfall walk?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, okay, well, let's go and see what happens, you know, let's just go see. And so we did the first half of the walk, which is about 1.5 kilometers through this thick mud, and like shoving him up hills in this wheelchair. And Noah started to get a bit worried, and I was like, you'll be fine, let's just go. And then we got to the bit where we knew was the end, which was there was a bridge over the waterfall, and then the rest of it's like a climb up the side of rocks and hills, and it's full on. And I just looked and I was like, well, we made it this far, that's great, buddy. And he gave me the look again. I was like, hey, but I'll have to carry you up there. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, well, as long as you promise not to panic, as long as you promise to be still, and as long as you promise that when we get up there, you know, there's stillness in you and not panic that you're up high. I said, because that can't be. And he was like, okay. So that was it. So I pulled him out of his wheelchair. I put my arms through his vest, which is the safest way to pick him up at the moment. And he is 15 kilos lighter than me and 7 centimeters shorter. So that gives you an indication of how big he is. And I dragged him up that hillside. I picked him up and I carried him up that hillside.
Oh.
His little face when he saw the waterfall, and he's always loved rainbows. And in fact, it's been on his living life list to see a rainbow through a waterfall. So just being able to do that with him, and then his little face was everything, right? You know, when you just go, you know what, today is a good day, today is worth it, and that's life full stop, right? It's those micro moments, that allowing of things that ordinarily you go, we do another time, or we're not going to do that today, or we'll find another way, or maybe tomorrow, right? Because we just don't know if we'll get tomorrow, so we do it today. And yeah, it was totally worth it. He wrote a letter, bless him, afterwards to say thank you. So that was really divine.
Such a beautiful story. So Kat, just quickly, so tell us about what you're actually doing right now with Empowerment Ethos to help other families.
So I run courses so it's 100% online, because as we know, that life is topsy-turvy, and especially at the moment. So people can come and join us online. And we talk about all sorts of things. We talk about the way that we talk to ourselves, and we talk about grit, and we talk about resilience. We talk about compassion, burnout. We look at actual burnout. We look at all different ways that we can look after ourselves. You know, we don't talk about self-care, because that then becomes a buzzword of what we can and can't do, like we can somehow pick and choose. We just talk about taking care of ourselves. We talk about community care, asking for help, and how we ask for help, because often that's not been modeled to us as a child, and sometimes lots of the things that's been modeled to us as we were growing up isn't something that we can apply to our own lives anymore. So what can we do? What new strategies can we learn in order to look after ourselves, and then to look after our small people? We look at things like the living life list, and